Trinidad neighborhood is home to approximately 6,400 residents in the city of Washington, D.C. The neighborhood is located less than a mile from one of Washington's landmarks, the U.S. Capitol. Once known as the Flower District, Trinidad lies just outside the historic 1791 L'Enfant Plan for the District of Columbia.
How long have you been a resident of the Trinidad neighborhood?
I've been here for 63 years because we had one child, 15 months old, and we felt we should try to get a home for, and I was pregnant. So we started looking for homes. And it was a real revelation to me to find that we weren't welcome in some neighborhoods. But Trinidad was accessible, and we were able to find this house in Trinidad. And it had the porch and a little yard in the back, and enough space for my children. I had one, and I was also pregnant. So we moved in 63 years ago. And we found it a good place to live, even if our neighbors weren't terribly friendly. But then before long they had moved out, and we were able to have other neighbors. The blacks began to move in droves, it seemed. And so they were all young married adults and had children. So it made it very, very nice for us to meet with them, and then we could socialize among the folks. And also, they had the same aspirations that we did for a good education for our children. However, it was a surprise. As a matter of fact, I asked the realtor now about schools. What about the schools? And he said that Wheatley at that time was segregated, but he was certain by the time my child was old enough to go to school, it would be turned over to the blacks. So I thought perhaps that would work out okay. But then, by the time she was old enough for school, it was still segregated, and we had to walk 10 blocks to Cromell School over in Ivy City, which meant getting the baby up as she was born, getting her up and dressed, and away we'd go. I did find some neighbors who consented to take my child, walk her to school at Cromell. But by the second grade, she was able to go to Wheatley School.
Bounded by West Virginia Avenue, Florida Avenue, Mount Olivet Road, and Bladensburg Road, Trinidad got its name because it was purchased by a former owner of the land who lived on the island of Trinidad and planned to relocate to the U.S., but died before he could realize his plan. The 0.27-mile square plot was first passed to the Corcoran family, who used it as a country estate. The neighborhood would be formally established.
Our house on Montello Avenue, which is primarily the Trinidad area, was built in 1919. And through research, we found that my mother's father paid $3,000 for it in the early 20s. So my mother was the only child. Her mother and father died in the early 30s. They died within a year, both died. So she was had no parents at age 17. So the thing about Montello Avenue, Trinidad, and West Virginia Avenue, I consider that Trinidad, but newspapers did too, is that it always was a basic middle-class black neighborhood. But the only people from another race that lived in the neighborhood were Jews. And if you go from Mount Oliver Road to Florida Avenue, there are about 5 commercial areas. And they were mom and pop stores, which Jews own, and they live over top of the stores. So I can only really say from 1950 to about the late 60s, there were about 4 Jewish families on Montel Avenue from Mount Oliver Road to Florida Avenue. I say about 1955, white people started moving out of apartments. They never did live on Montel Avenue or Trinidad Avenue. And then you just didn't see them no more. But after the whites moved out of the apartment, that's about people next door. Then African Americans started moving in all the apartments. And about 80% of those African Americans worked in the printing office and the post office. All of them had some printing office, post office, bill of engraving, places like that. So all of them had pretty good jobs. And so when we first started the poverty program, we did a survey of the neighborhood, and we found that 80% of them were middle-class blacks in that neighborhood. And the residences in the homes, but there was a lot of apartments in between, and that's what changed after the 50s. And each time there's a turnover. A poor person lived in apartments, Penn Street, Holbrook Terrace, all of that. So that's what destroyed the neighborhoods. So too many apartments and transit people and changing of residents. But the homeowners and resident people, most of them are old families. They've been living there 40 to 50 years. And after I got older, I worked in a war on poverty. It was called Community Improvement Corporation. It was a nonprofit corporation on Florida Avenue, 1326 Florida Avenue Northeast, next to the fire station. It was on Florida and Trinidad Avenue, right on the corner. It was there for 30 years. I worked there for 13 years, and I was the executive director for 5 of them years. So when I left, I went to the federal government, Department of Interior Office for Equal Opportunity in the Interior. Then I worked there for 20 years, but I worked 13 years in the war on poverty. And they had about 5 or 6 different programs of unemployment, eviction assistance, food stamps, consumer protection. Employment was probably our most useful service. Housing, if you got evicted, we get your stuff for you and make sure to put it in a warehouse or something. And we were there for close to 30 years.
Hi, my name is Brenda Colker Pascal. I'm the youngest of 3 daughters of Fred and Sarah Colker. My father came from Baltimore when he was 7 to live in Washington, and my mother was a native Washingtonian, as my sisters and I were. And my father, when I grew up, all I knew is that my father had a poultry business in the market, which was that I always called it the Florida Avenue Market, but the names could be Union Market, Northeast Market. It had many different names. I'm not quite sure. I think probably officially it was the Union Market. And I just visited him. We would go. I think he rented some space above the street where my husband's office was after he became a lawyer, and then he moved further down the street. The only thing I remember about the first morning is I think my middle sister almost got killed because they had some racks where the chickens were kind of put in, and it had a sharp edge, and I think my sister, I vaguely remember, I think my sister got her head caught in it or something, but I don't know how true it is. It's just something I remember. And we would just visit my father because he would go to work 4 or 5 every morning and not come home till late at night, And particularly Thanksgiving was an unbelievable time in our house. But Thanksgiving, usually November and December, Christmas and Thanksgiving were really hard on my father. He would work, I always said he'd work 23 hours a day. He'd come home at night, take a bath, change his clothes. My mother would give him dinner, and then he would go back to work.
It meant we were homeowners, and that's a very good feeling when you never lived in apartments until you came to Washington, and now you're a homeowner. It makes that gives you a good feeling, but now it's a mixed feeling. You're happy to have a home in Trinidad, and when you see the slightest improvement being made in the Trinidad. As a matter of fact, just recently, I wrote a letter to the mayor and also to the city council, our new city councilman McDuffie, asking to have dead trees cut down on our block, and also to have our alley paved. And we were thrilled to no end when we looked out and we saw they had paved our alley. And this is unusual for them to do it so quickly, but they did, and cleaned it up. And we are now waiting for them to cut the dead trees down. So there are signs of improvement all over Trinidad. And we're hoping that some of that improvement will enter the hearts of the new residents, so they will see that they too can make a difference in Trinidad.
So can you tell us where you were in 1968 with you and your daughter?
Mm-hmm. My daughter had just come home for the weekend from Hampton University, and when we could look out the upstairs window and see Sears burning and the liquor store burning, and it upset us terribly. So we came downstairs, we turned out all the lights, and I looked out the window and I saw groups of people going up the street, down the street, in the alleys, and they were carrying furniture sometimes, and it was such a sad situation. I felt so terrible about it that the two of us sat here and cried, and we wondered, how could they do this? That had nothing whatsoever to do with Martin Luther King. Why are they burning the stores in their own neighborhoods? And you were concerned that would they come and decide to burn your house or whatever. And it so happened too that I had some drapes I had custom made in the cleaning shop on West Virginia Avenue, and they cleaned out the place, and part of a suit was missing. So it was a sad time.
My additional recollections relate to the Binder brothers that owned the liquor store at Montello and Florida Avenue. The two brothers were inseparable in running the business because prior to the April riots, one of them got shot in a holdup, and as a result of that, I don't think the two brothers ever wanted to leave each other. ABC stores, liquor stores in that day were focal points of the neighborhood, and the binders were well liked in the neighborhood. I remember after one was wounded, many expressions by many of the neighbors that were conveyed to me of how sorry they were to see what had happened. When the riots came, because of their fear of leaving each other, and again, I was an attorney at that time, I actually handled the whole sale of the store at the store, including the settlement, and we actually had police officers in the store at the time. It's unlike any other settlement I ever had in my career. And I ended up representing the 4 men that bought the store. One of them, Lowell Gaines, is the remaining member, still owns the property and rents it out to the existing. And they were great clients to have. All but Lowell have passed away at this point in time. During the riots, of course, the city was in a lot of turmoil, and I would imagine the residents of Trinidad were probably very upset with what was going on because they were so close to the destruction that was taking place on 8th Street. I was concerned because the Florida Avenue Market was the breadbasket of the city. This is where all the food came. That in a typical insurrection, the food basket is trying to be disrupted. So I met with Chief Layton the second day of that Friday. The riots started on a Thursday night, and I personally met with him on Friday to talk about the safety of the market. And they brought the National Guard in. And the National Guard came to 2 places in the market, one in front of my father-in-law's business and one in front of my law office. We were very secure. At that time, the president of Giant actually wanted my father-in-law to donate chickens to the residents that were being disrupted. And my wife and I actually went to the market to meet the Giant driver. And because of all the tensions there, they couldn't find a driver to come to the market, so we ended up going home. And it was a very interesting period of time. The market itself was made up of about 70 or 80 businesses. Many of them owners were related to each other. My father-in-law was related to a number of people in the market. And many of us would have breakfast together at a restaurant called Hendrick's every morning at 8 o'clock, because one of the meat merchants would always bring over a big steak to be cooked on the stove, and anybody who was in the restaurant got a little bit of the steak with their eggs. So it was a real friendly place, and like I say, a lot of the employees in the market lived in the Trinidad area because it was very easy for them to walk over to the market, and they made up the core of the workers, the drivers, the warehouse people that helped load and unload trucks. It was a very interesting period of time.
When you think about Trinidad today, what word or words come to mind?
I'm very disappointed because what I see going on is a lot of gentrification. I welcome all cultures, all incomes to Trinidad, but I think it should be more of a flavor and be fair, so other people of different incomes have the same loan borrowing capacities as a lot of the investors and new homeowners who are moving in to our neighborhoods.
When you think about Trinidad now, what words come to mind?
When I think about the neighborhood now, I guess the word I think of is transitional, and because it's clear that the neighborhood's changing, it's clear that the demographics of the neighborhood are changing, and the perception of it is changing, with H Street becoming more popular and more of a destination. We're suddenly we're right off of that strip, and we're getting attention that we never got before. Maybe not in the same way anyway. This is now a desirable neighborhood for more people than it had been before, and so that change is something that has to be mitigated somehow, but I don't know how that happens. I want to see this neighborhood be a place that stays, that has a wide range of people in it, old, young, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever that is, deaf, hearing. But I realize that the neighborhoods change. Neighborhoods always change. What something is today isn't what it was yesterday. It's not what it was 5-10 years ago. It's certainly not what it was back in the 1920s. So you can't freeze something. You can't make it say, oh, well, it's perfect now. Let's keep it that way and not let anything happen. But it's a neighborhood is people. And how do you make sure that while it's changing, it doesn't change in a way that hurts the people that are there or doesn't push them aside and keep them from having a say, at least, in how that change happens?
My first reactions to Trinidad, I have to admit, were not positive. In regards to the stigma that I heard about Trinidad, I've lived in Washington, D.C. for over 12 years, but I had never crossed out of Northwest, maybe once or twice, but that was basically it. So the Trinidad neighborhood in 2008, was infamous, and it had quite a stigma on it that made national headlines, and that was the only thing that I knew about Trinidad, and that pretty much lasted with me for almost 4 years, and I had no interactions, and I never even thought about coming over into this area. And then when I started looking for properties and Northwest became too expensive and it wasn't affordable any longer, I decided, let me go see what Trinidad had to offer. My first interactions actually stepping into the Trinidad neighborhood was one of shock and awe, I must say. It was one of confusion, and I couldn't quite tell what was going on over here. There were some positive things going on, there were some negative things going on, and I really couldn't figure out where I could fit into this Trinidad mode of things, or this Trinidad neighborhood. But then when I actually started to come over here a little bit more often and actually walk through the neighborhood. And then my second reaction was one of hope and promise, and it just seemed like this neighborhood had so much to offer. I mean, the people that you met, they would speak. It was nothing like you saw on television. And I started to tell even some of my friends, hey, you should try venturing over into Northeast. Give Trinidad a chance. And just like I told someone before who told me to come over here, they all said I was crazy. But Trinidad is one of those places that once you step into it, you see all the positive that can be here, all the hope, and all the positive that actually is here in the Trinidad neighborhood. And it's that stigma that kind of has kept it down for so long. But with the development that's going on, I think it's going to be it already is a wonderful place to live, and I think it's just going to be spectacular in the near future.
What kinds of programs and services do you think Trinidad needs?
Quite some years ago, we had a small community library. Well, that is no more. We definitely need some kind of library situation in Trinidad. We need to stress education a little more. Now, Wheatley School has been renovated, and I understand there are some good programs going on there. Webb School has been closed, where my children finished. But we have, years ago, we had organized groups. I had Campfire Girls for 13 years. We had Boy Scout groups. The churches had activities. There were drum and bugle corps groups in Trinidad. we no longer have. We had two big drum and bugle corps, which kept the young adults occupied, and we have that no more. We had clubs of young people, several clubs. I know my oldest daughter was a part of a club where they were able to have all manner of activities and do community service projects.
I think, like a lot of neighborhoods in the city, we spend a lot of time talking about programming for youth, which is absolutely important. But what I think, and this is not just to Trinidad, I think it's citywide, but we can talk about Trinidad in particular. I think we need to be focusing on aging in place. We have a lot of elderly residents, and going around and walking to pass out flyers or whatever, what we hear are people in the neighborhood are really looking for opportunities at the rec center, either just to socialize with their neighbors, maybe take some light aerobics classes or some kind of card games. And because we have sort of the not overabundance, but we have so much in having two rec centers that we have the ability to really serve everyone in the community. But I think that looking at not only youth programming, but older adult and elderly programming would be an excellent idea. And I think as the neighborhood kind of grows into this new pattern that we're seeing, we've got a splash park now, which clearly indicates that we've got kids in the neighborhood. I think family programming at the same time, and we've got a small group that started up just getting families together in the neighborhood, mostly with younger kids, toddler age kids, but getting together to do activities at both the rec centers, either with the friends groups or just on their own. So I see sort of a three-tiered, we need youth programming, we need family programming for younger children, and we need some programming for our older and senior residents. It would just be invaluable, and if we can mix them together, I think that would be pretty amazing.
What kinds of programs and services do you think Trinidad needs?
Honestly, the programs that Trinidad, what they need, what this community needs, I think it's already here. The key to a successful program is consistency and trust. And right now, with that being built, and it's becoming a strong point of this community, the sky's the limit. So, trust and consistency, along with the program that's already in place.
So, economic development is a phrase that's often used when you think about, sort of buildings being built, cranes going up around the city. I'm a student of community development. And when I hear somebody use the phrase economic development, I always think about economic empowerment, because ultimately I think that's what the city wants to achieve when you're doing projects around the city. And so for me, all development projects, particularly those that are funded with city funds, should be community driven in nature. And I say that to mean the community should have a seat at the table to help sort of frame what the needs are of the community. Whether there should be a focus on retail, whether there should be a focus on services and amenities, how small businesses really play a role in the process. Whether or not developers are utilizing the existing small businesses perhaps to help develop the project. Whether or not residents in the area are being hired to perform work, and not just the construction jobs, which I think are very important, but jobs on the front end in design, architecture, as well as jobs on the back end, the permanent jobs as it relates to retail and things like that. So, I always think about economic empowerment and economic security and using community development as a way to empower individuals and neighborhoods, making sure that what is built reflects the desires and wants and needs of the residents who live in the neighborhood, is sort of the approach that I take to economic development. And I think it's one that a lot of people throughout Ward 5 and throughout the city, and throughout Trinidad for that matter, subscribe to. If you come into our community with the goal in mind of building something, developing an area, then make sure the residents of Trinidad have a seat at the table. Make sure that they're helping to craft the vision for that project. Make sure that they are intimately involved in every phase of the development project. And so, again, that's something that I subscribe to, and I think that's an approach that if we follow, it'll be beneficial to create new streams of revenue. When you talk about property taxes, from new homes, income taxes, from the jobs that it create, as well as sales taxes from the new businesses. I think it's a win-win for the city. I think it's a win for developers who ultimately assume the risk in developing a project. But critically, it's a win for the residents of that particular community who aren't left out of the